we're very fortunate today to have as our speaker Jacqueline Cabasso. I discovered Jackie when she was doing a talk show on KPFA radio, the Sunday show with Philip Muldery. Jacqueline has, and part of the reason I chose this, I've been thinking a lot, like most of us, about the pandemic and the climate crisis that we're in. And one of the things that is very possibly and ominously could get triggered by the climate crisis are massive dislocations of various populations. And that's already starting, you know, in certain parts of the world. Many of those parts of the world are very troubled politically, and many of those parts of the world are also nuclear armed. So I thought it was appropriate to ask Jackie to come and speak to us. Jackie is Executive Director of the Western States Legal Foundation, based in Oakland. She's been that since 1984. She's been involved in several movements: the nuclear disarmament, of course, the peace movement, environmental and social justice advocacy at local, national, and international levels for over 35 years. She's also co-author of a couple of books, one called Nuclear Disorder or Cooperative Security, ? Another called Risking Peace, which was an account of the demonstrations that took place at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Laboratory many years ago. She's also the United Nations puts out a publication called Rethinking General and Complete Disarmament in the 21st Century, and Jackie is a contributing author to that. She's won the International Peace Bureau's 2008 Sean McBride Peace Award and the Agape Foundation's 2009 Enduring Visionary Prize. So we're very fortunate to have her. Let's all give her a warm Century Club virtual greeting. Take it away, Jackie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Craig, for inviting me. So I gave my talk a title today, so this is what I'm going to be talking about. 75 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the quest for nuclear disarmament. Where do things stand? A little over 75 years ago, on August 6, 1945, the United States unleashed the nuclear age, dropping a single atomic bomb on Hiroshima, which indiscriminately incinerated tens of thousands of children, women, and men in an instant. It was a tiny and crude nuclear weapon by today's standards, justified by a lie of historic proportions that the bombing ended World War II and saved American lives. Over 90% of the doctors and nurses in Hiroshima were killed or injured by the bomb. 3 days later, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. By the end of 1945, more than 210,000 people, mainly civilians, were dead. And the surviving A-bomb victims, who are called hibakusha, their children and grandchildren continue to suffer from physical and psychological effects of the bombings. We've also recently marked the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. On January 24th, 1946, the United Nations General Assembly adopted by consensus its very first resolution, Resolution 1, which established a commission of the UN Security Council to ensure the control of atomic energy, to ensure its use only for peaceful purposes, and the elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and all other major weapons adaptable to mass destruction. Yet in 1951, the Western Shoshone Territory was seized by executive order of President Harry Truman to create the Nevada test site, which has become known as the most bombed nation on Earth. The 928 American and 19 British nuclear explosions conducted in what is properly called New Segovia between 1951 and 1992 have been classified by the Western Shoshone National Council as bombs rather than tests, because the purpose of a bomb is to destroy, while the idea of a test is to introduce something new. About 1,350 square miles of their total territory of about 43,000 square miles has been destroyed by hundreds of craters and tunnels, which are de facto uncontrolled underground nuclear waste dumps. Since 1945, there have been 2,056 nuclear weapon tests by at least 8 countries. Most of these tests have been conducted on the lands of indigenous and colonized people. The United States conducted 1,030 of those tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and underground, while the USSR carried out 715 nuclear test detonations. Not only did these nuclear test explosions fuel the development and spread of new and more deadly types of nuclear weapons, but hundreds of thousands of people have died and millions more have suffered and continue to suffer from illnesses directly related to the radioactive fallout from nuclear detonations in the United States, islands in the Pacific, in Australia, China, Algeria, across Russia, in Kazakhstan, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and elsewhere. A 1990 National Cancer Institute study concluded that fallout from nuclear blasts at the Nevada test site may have caused from 10,000 to 75,000 thyroid cancers. There were few, if any, Americans in the contiguous 48 states at the time who were not exposed to some level of fallout. In 1995, the then mayor of Hiroshima, Takashi Hiraoka, described the unimaginable violence of nuclear weapons in testimony before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki shattered all war precedent. The mind-numbing damage these nuclear weapons wrought shook the foundations of human existence. Beneath the atomic bomb's monstrous mushroom cloud, human skin was burned raw, crying for water. Human beings died in desperate agony. With thoughts of these victims as a starting point, it is incumbent upon us to think about the nuclear age and the relationship between human beings and nuclear weapons. The unique characteristic of the atomic bombing was that the enormous destruction was instantaneous and universal. Old, young, male, female, soldier, civilian. The killing was utterly indiscriminate. The entire city was exposed to the compound and devastating effects of thermal rays, shockwave blast, and radiation. Above all, we must focus on the fact that the human misery caused by the atomic bomb is different from that caused by conventional weapons. Human bodies were burned by the thermal rays and high temperature fires, broken and lacerated by the blast, and insidiously attacked by radiation. These forms of damage compounded and amplified each other. The bomb reduced Hiroshima to an inhuman state utterly beyond human ability to express or imagine. And he concluded, quote, "History is written by the victors. Thus, the heinous massacre that was Hiroshima has been handed down to us as a perfectly justified act of war. It is clear that the use of nuclear weapons, which cause indiscriminate mass murder that leaves survivors for decades, is a violation of international law. The United States, the only nation that has used nuclear weapons in war, has never acknowledged or apologized for the heinous massacre that was Hiroshima and Nagasaki." So where are we now? President Trump's decision last year to withdraw the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF Treaty, followed by Russia's, signaled a deepening crisis among the nuclear armed states. Following the 2002 US withdrawal from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, it imperils the entire structure of arms control and disarmament, including prospects for extension of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START, which expires in February 2021 and could contribute to new unpredictable rounds of arms racing. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently warned, quote, "The only treaty constraining the size of the world's largest nuclear arsenals is set to expire early next year, raising the alarming possibility of a return to unconstrained strategic competition," end quote. Prospects for US-Russian agreement on extension of START in the next few months are dicey. Also last year, the US violated really, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, and reimposed sanctions on Iran, which is now suffering so severely from the coronavirus pandemic. This is a major blow to international governance and to peace and disarmament in the region and the world. The United States has not ratified the 1996 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, one of 8 remaining ratifications necessary for the treaty's entry into force. Though the Senate voted against ratification in 1999, the US has observed a moratorium on full-scale nuclear tests since 1992. However, in a very worrying development, it was reported in May that senior officials in the Trump administration were discussing resumption of underground nuclear testing. In 2019, President Trump initiated withdrawal of the US from the Paris Climate Accord. And shockingly, in the midst of the global pandemic, in July, the Trump administration formally moved Mikhail Gorbachev, the former Soviet leader who signed the INF state taken the initiative in destroying the entire security following World War II. We are living in a time of extraordinary nuclear dangers. Derek Johnson, Executive Director of Global Zero, has assessed today's nuclear threat as an unprecedented moment in history. The world never faced so many nuclear. South Asia, the nuclear armed states are tangled up in conflicts and crises that could catastrophic. Duan, director of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, has declared that the risk of nuclear weapons being used again is at its highest since World War II, calling it an urgent issue that the world should take more seriously. United Nations High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, has declared, quote, "The specter of unconstrained nuclear competition looms over us for the first time since the 1970s. We are witnessing what has been termed a qualitative nuclear arms race, one not based on numbers, but on faster, stealthier, and more accurate weapons. Regional conflicts with a nuclear dimension are worsening, and proliferation challenges are not receding." And in January, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the hands of its iconic doomsday clock to 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been set since its inception in 1947, declaring, quote, "Humanity continues to face two simultaneous existential dangers, nuclear war and climate change, that are compounded by a threat multiplier, cyber-enabled information warfare, that undercuts society's ability to respond. The international security situation is dire, not just because these threats exist, but because world leaders have allowed the international political infrastructure for managing them to erode. Today, nearly 13,500 nuclear weapons, most an order of magnitude more powerful than the US bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, more than 90% held by the United States and Russia, continue to pose an intolerable threat to humanity, and the dangers of wars among nuclear armed states are growing. The other nuclear armed states are France, China, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Donald Trump entered office with the US poised to spend an estimated $1.2 trillion over the next 30 years to maintain and modernize its nuclear bombs, warheads, and delivery systems, and the infrastructure to sustain the nuclear enterprise indefinitely. This enormous estimate has already gone up to $1.7 trillion and is growing. Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review carries forward existing plans for the replacement and upgrading of submarine, land, and air-based nuclear forces, while adding a new sea-based cruise missile. It also calls for near-term deployment of low-yield warheads on submarine-based missiles. And it describes how nuclear weapons might be used in response to attacks of a non-nuclear nature, including cyber attacks against critical US infrastructure. This anti-disarmament program envisions US reliance on extensive and diversified nuclear forces for decades to come. Mirroring the US stance, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a March 2018 speech, boasted about new invincible Russian nuclear weapons and gave a detailed description complete with video animations of an array of new nuclear weapons delivery systems, including a nuclear-powered cruise missile and an underwater drone. All of the nuclear armed states are engaged in nuclear weapons modernization programs. United States military spending grew by 5.3% to a total of $732 billion in 2019 and accounted for 38% of global military spending. The Trump administration requested over $740 billion for the military in its fiscal year 2021 budget proposal, far more than the United States spent for military purposes at the height of the Korean or Vietnam Wars or the peak of the Reagan buildup in the 1980s. The biggest increase in the fiscal year 2021 budget is a nearly 20% increase on spending on nuclear weapons, $45 billion. And it's worth noting that according to a recent study, the amount of money spent in 1 year by the US on nuclear weapons could instead provide 300,000 intensive care unit beds, 35,000 ventilators, and 75,000 doctors' salaries. An alarming but often overlooked trend is the increased scale and tempo of war games by nuclear-armed states and their allies, including nuclear drills, ongoing missile tests, and frequent close encounters between military forces of nuclear-armed states, including the US and Russia, the US and China, and India and Pakistan, exacerbate nuclear dangers. And these incidents, by the way, are happening almost every day, the pandemic notwithstanding. In the early 1980s, US deployment of cruise and Pershing missiles to Western Europe stoked fears that Russia would serve as the battleground in a US-Soviet nuclear war. It was this fear that mobilized a massive global anti-nuclear movement, leading to negotiation of the recently abrogated INF Treaty. On June 21st, 1982, at the conclusion of the United Nations' second special session on disarmament, 1 million people rallied in New York City's Central Park calling for the elimination of nuclear weapons, and huge solidarity demonstrations took place around the world. That day, I was among some 1,500 people arrested, nonviolently blocking the gates to the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Laboratory. The Livermore Lab, near us, is one of 2 US laboratories that have designed and developed all US nuclear weapons and continue to do so. The other is the Los Alamos Lab in New Mexico, the site of the original Manhattan Project. And I just want to mention here that the Livermore Lab is currently developing a refurbished W-84 warhead for use in the Air Force's long-range standoff cruise missile, and the W-87-1, a completely new replacement warhead to be paired with an updated re-entry vehicle and new intercontinental ballistic missile delivery system. Yet following the end of the Cold War, nuclear weapons fell off the public's radar screen. It was almost as if the planet itself breathed a huge sigh of relief. People around the world hoped and believed that they had escaped a nuclear holocaust and largely put nuclear weapons out of their minds. Most people believed that the threat of nuclear war had ended, but it hadn't. Deeply embedded in the US military-industrial complex, military planners and scientists at the nuclear weapons labs conjured up new justifications to sustain the nuclear weapons enterprise. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Colin Powell, then chair of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, declared, quote, "We no longer have the luxury of having a specific threat to plan for. What we plan for is that we're a superpower. We are the major player on the world stage with responsibilities and interests around the world." US national security policy has been remarkably consistent since 1945. Deterrence, the threatened use of nuclear weapons, has been reaffirmed as the cornerstone of US national security by every president, Republican or Democrat, since President Harry Truman, a Democrat, oversaw the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In his famed 2009 Prague speech, President Obama declared, quote, "To put an end to Cold War thinking, we will reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy and urge others to do the same." But this was immediately followed by, quote, "Make no mistake, as long as these weapons exist, the United States will maintain a safe, secure, and effective arsenal to deter any adversary and guarantee that defense to our allies." Sure enough, a November 2010 White House fact sheet entitled "An Enduring Commitment to the U.S. Nuclear Deterrent" announced the Obama administration's plans, quote, to invest more than $85 billion over the next decade to modernize the US nuclear weapons complex that supports our deterrent. Still quoting, this level of funding is unprecedented since the end of the Cold War, end quote. This did not include an additional $100 billion by 2020 to modernize the missiles and delivery systems that carry US nuclear warheads. This huge sum was the price exacted by the US military industrial complex and its representatives in the Senate for Senate ratification of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the START Treaty, on December 22nd, 2010. The political conditions attached to Senate ratification in the US and mirrored by Russia effectively turned START into an anti-disarmament measure. This was stated in so many words by Senator Bob Corker, a Republican senator from Tennessee, whose state is home to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, site of a proposed multi-billion-dollar uranium processing facility. Quote, I am proud that as a result of ratification, we have been successful in securing commitments from the administration on modernization of our nuclear arsenal and support of our missile defense programs, two things that would not have happened otherwise. In fact, thanks in part to the contributions my staff and I have been able to make, the new START Treaty could easily be called the, quote, Nuclear Modernization and Missile Defense Act of 2010, end quote. Now, paradoxically, this is the same START treaty the Trump administration is now threatening to scuttle. The resolution of ratification adopted by the United States Senate included commitments to massive investments in the nuclear weapons infrastructure and modernization program and to continued development of national missile defenses. The Senate also successfully obtained assurances that the treaty placed no limits on the development and deployment of new kinds of non-nuclear missiles and delivery vehicles with non-ballistic trajectories, such as the boost glide concepts being explored for prompt global strike. Final ratification of the new START treaty by the Russian Duma was subject to its own reciprocal conditions, including the Russian president's obligation to undertake a program to modernize the Russian Federation's strategic nuclear forces. Grounds for the Russian Federation's withdrawal include the unilateral deployment by the United States of missile defense systems and the adoption of strategic non-nuclear or prompt global strike weapon systems by the United States without the Russian Federation's approval. These conditions illustrate the complications of what is referred to as strategic stability, the intrinsic relationship between nuclear and conventional weapons. Russia has consistently called for inclusion of strategic stability in arms control discussions, nuclear arms control discussions, while the US has categorically refused. At a high-level conference in Rome in 2009, Mikhail Gorbachev warned that the pursuit of, quote, military superiority would be an insurmountable obstacle to ridding the world of nuclear weapons. Unless we discuss demilitarization of international politics, the reduction of military budgets, preventing militarization of outer space, talking about a nuclear-free world will be just rhetorical, end quote. What does deterrence mean? And I want to note that the word deterrence, the Latin root, means terror. A typical understanding of Cold War deterrence meant maintaining the capacity to inflict a devastating retaliatory second strike or mutually assured destruction if either the United States or the Soviet Union attacked the other with nuclear weapons. But what did it really mean? And what does it mean now? Deterrence encompasses the entire military industrial complex and the national security state and elites that it serves, and not only in the United States. Deterrence is an ideology which has outlived its Cold War origins and is used by nuclear weapon states to justify the perpetual possession and threatened use, including first use of nuclear weapons. Deterrence in post-Cold War US national security doctrine goes well beyond the threat of retaliation. As stated in a September 2008 Department of Defense report on the Air Force's nuclear mission, quote, though our consistent goal has been to avoid actual weapons use, the nuclear deterrent is used every day by assuring friends and allies, dissuading opponents from seeking peer capabilities to the United States, deterring attacks on the United States and its allies from potential adversaries, and providing the potential to defeat adversaries if deterrence fails. In other words, the US uses the threat of nuclear attack the same way a bank robber might use a gun held to the temple of a bank teller. In his 2007 book, Empire and the Bomb, How the US Uses Nuclear Weapons to Dominate the World, Joseph Gerson wrote, quote, on at least 30 occasions since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, every US president has prepared and or threatened to initiate nuclear war during international crises, confrontations, and wars, primarily in the third world. To name just two, in 1996, President Clinton made a covert nuclear threat against an alleged underground chemical weapons facility in Libya. And in 2002, President Bush had contingency plans drawn up for battlefield use of nuclear weapons in Iraq. According to the Obama administration's 2010 nuclear posture review, the United States is not prepared at the present time to adopt a universal policy that the sole purpose of US nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attack on the United States and our allies and partners. Although it vaguely commits to, quote, work to establish the conditions under which such a policy could be safely adopted, end quote. And the Nuclear Posture Review does not rule out first use. In a January 2010 Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled How to Protect Our Nuclear Deterrent, the four horsemen, George Shultz, William Perry, Henry Kissinger, and Sam Nunn declared, quote, maintaining high confidence in our nuclear arsenal is critical as the numbers of these weapons go down. The United States must continue to attract, develop, and retain the outstanding scientists, engineers, designers, and technicians we will need to maintain our nuclear arsenal, whatever its size, for as long as the nation's security requires it. And they warned, quote, the deadliest weapons ever invented could fall into dangerous hands, end quote, calling for a substantial increase in funding for the US nuclear weapons laboratories and a modernized nuclear weapons infrastructure to prevent this from happening. The four horsemen's analysis and recommendations were endorsed by Vice President Joe Biden 10 days later in a Wall Street Journal op-ed announcing the administration's inflated fiscal year 2011 budget request. Unfortunately, this circular reasoning is very short-sighted. Investing in a modernized nuclear weapons infrastructure will be viewed as hypocritical by other nations. And as we're seeing now, it will provide the next president and future presidents the means to design and build new nuclear weapons if they so choose, and thus spark new arms races. In their op-ed, the four horsemen invoked the specter of nuclear weapons falling into dangerous hands 3 times. Yet, in whose hands are nuclear weapons safe? The only hands that have used them so far? As the Hans Blix-led Weapons of Mass Destruction stated in its 2006 report, Weapons of Terror, Freeing the World of Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Arms, quote, the Commission rejects the suggestion that nuclear weapons in the hands of some pose no threat, while in the hands of others, they place the world in mortal jeopardy, end quote. And they wisely observe, quote, governments possessing nuclear weapons can act responsibly or recklessly. Governments may also change over time, end quote. In short, nuclear weapons are dangerous in anyone's hands. The policy of nuclear deterrence is not passive, and it's not benign. In late 2018, President Trump, claiming that Russia had violated the INF Treaty, issued a threat to the entire world. Referring to the US stockpile, he warned, quote, until people come to their senses, we will build it up. It's a threat to whoever you want. It includes China, and it includes Russia, and includes anybody else that wants to play that game. We have more money than anybody else so far. We'll build it up until they come to their senses. Well, on July 7, 2017, I was at the UN to witness the adoption by the majority of the world's countries of a historic treaty to prohibit the possession, development, testing, use, and threat of use of nuclear weapons. The vote, by 122 to 1, unambiguously demonstrates, at least by one measure, that most of the world has indeed come to its senses regarding nuclear weapons. the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, opened for signature at UN headquarters in New York on September 20th, 2017. Once 50 nations have ratified or acceded to it, it will enter into force for those countries. So far, 84 countries have signed, 46 have ratified. That the ban treaty will enter into force next year. Any use of nuclear weapons. From the preamble, quote, cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons cannot be adequate, transcend national borders, pose grave implications for human survival, the environment, socio-economic development, the global economy, food security, and the health of current and future generations, end quote. This comes into sharp focus as we experience the unfolding reality of governments and public health systems completely unprepared to respond to the coronavirus pandemic and looming global economic collapse. But we stand at a nuclear crossroads in a sharply divided world. While the ban treaty represents the total repudiation of nuclear weapons by most states that don't possess them, the US and the 8 other nuclear armed states boycotted the negotiations, along with Japan, Australia, South Korea, and all but one of the 28 NATO member states, all countries under the US nuclear umbrella. In a joint statement following the vote, the US, France, and the United Kingdom declared, quote, we do not intend to sign, ratify, or ever become party to the treaty, end quote. And I would note here that the majority of the world's population lives in nuclear armed countries or countries under the US umbrella. And these are also the world's largest economies. In October 2016, President Obama's UN ambassador, Robert Wood, condemned the ban treaty in the General Assembly, quote, advocates of a ban treaty say it is open to all, but how can a state that relies on nuclear weapons for its security possibly join a negotiation meant to stigmatize and eliminate them, end quote. The 1970 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, or NPT, represents the only binding commitment in a multilateral treaty to the goal of disarmament by the 5 original nuclear armed states: the United States, the United Kingdom, the USSR, subsequently Russia, France, and China. Article 6 spells out the disarmament obligation, quote, each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. The NPT's disarmament obligations, enshrined in the preamble in Article 6, have been reiterated and reinforced by agreements made in connection with the 1995 extension decision, the 2000 and 2010 review conferences, and the International Court of Justice's 1996 advisory opinion, which provided the authoritative interpretation of Article 6. The court found unanimously, quote, there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control, end quote. The principles and objectives for non-proliferation and disarmament adopted in connection with the 1995 NPT extension decision, the 13 practical steps for the systematic and progressive efforts to implement Article 6 of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, including, quote, an unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals leading to nuclear disarmament, to which all states parties are committed under Article 6, adopted by the 2000 Review Conference, and the 64-point action plan, which includes concrete steps for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, adopted at the conclusion of the 2010 Review Conference. All of these things, developments, created expectations on the part of the non-nuclear weapon states parties, 184 countries that have forsworn nuclear weapons, that nuclear disarmament was a work in progress. However, the failure of the nuclear armed states to make good on their disarmament obligations, and to the contrary, in the face of new arms racing, The long-term viability of the NPT is being questioned by some. The 5-year NPT review conference that had been scheduled for May 2020, the 50th anniversary of the treaty, was postponed due to the pandemic and will be rescheduled no later than April 2021. It will come at a critical time in the international nuclear weapons discourse. Given the global stakes, it's hard to understand how the subject of nuclear weapons has been entirely absent from the 2020 presidential campaign. At least one constituency, America's mayors, tried to change this. Led by US members of Mayors for Peace, an international organization of nearly 8,000 members in 164 countries, headed by the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the US Conference of Mayors, the nonpartisan association of more than 1,400 cities with populations over 30,000, at its 2019 annual meeting unanimously adopted a resolution entitled, quote, calling on all presidential candidates to make known their positions on nuclear weapons and to pledge US global leadership in preventing nuclear war, returning to diplomacy, and negotiating the elimination of nuclear weapons, end quote. Unfortunately, the wise counsel of America's mayors has fallen largely on deaf ears in both parties. So I'd like to make some concluding observations. And I'm aware that I have painted a rather dark picture. We are living in an incredible, unprecedented time. 1 year ago, who could have imagined a deadly global pandemic, economic collapse, and massive racial justice uprisings? Add to this the rise of authoritarian national leaders around the world, including in at least 6 of the nuclear armed states, the alarming crisis of democracy in the United States, and hurricanes, wildfires, and sea rise of historic proportions. And it's safe to say that we're living in a period of greater uncertainty than at any time in many of our lifetimes. Whoever is occupying the White House and Congress next year, nuclear weapons will remain an existential threat, demanding our vigilance, our advocacy, and our engagement. Changes, both good and bad, are happening incredibly fast, and there is a new openness to critically examining the US history of racism and violence. Now is a good time to take a critical look at the official US justification that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary to end the war and save American lives. In this time of national reckoning, we are called to examine the implications of the US decision to use atomic bombs in 1945. In an out-of-control pandemic, as we confront escalating police violence and the imposition of federal troops in our cities, it is imperative for us to question the nature of state violence and national priorities, past and present. We must move from the irrational, fear-based ideology of deterrence to the rational fear of an eventual nuclear weapons use, whether by accident or design, by some nuclear weapon possessing state that places the threatened use of nuclear weapons at the core of its national security policy. We also need to stimulate a rational hope that security can be redefined in humanitarian and ecologically sustainable terms that will lead to the elimination of nuclear weapons and dramatic demilitarization, freeing up tremendous resources desperately needed to address universal human needs. We are in a brave new world. In the midst of turbulent uncertainties, it is difficult to predict how progress on the elimination of nuclear weapons, much less efforts to restore modest arms control measures, can succeed. But one thing is clear: while we can and must support renewed multilateralism, we cannot depend on national governments to protect we the peoples. Civil society must come together as never before to build durable, broad, diverse, multi-issue coalitions, networks, and networks of networks based on our shared commitments to universal, indivisible human security. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
So at this point, if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them here in the chat, or if you'd like to risk it and unmute yourself and just shout out your question. I think we've got a small enough group we can handle that.
Oh, Bill has one.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you for that. One of the things of all the many outrages that we as Democrats have experienced in the Trump administration happened like through the election in 2016 and immediately following, which was Donald Trump saying for out loud that we had these nuclear weapons, why wouldn't we use them? And as shocking as that was, I was shocked as much by the lack of like universal condemnation. I didn't feel people rising up to condemn that. And I wonder if we missed that, or if it was just that people couldn't take him seriously at that moment, because I think he was probably serious given what we know now.
Yeah. The whole question of why public awareness or public concern has been so low for so many years now is a puzzle that I really don't have an answer to, except sometimes I've encountered young people who, consider nuclear weapons to be just sort of part of the natural world, and there's nothing they can do about them, and they've always been here and they always will. But there are so many warnings, as I included a number of them in my talk, about what the dangers really are now, that you're right. Trump is such an aberration that it's difficult to evaluate anything he says or does by any normal standards, and the outrages come so fast and furious that he's already on to the next one. But it is something to be concerned about. Consider the fact that right now, and I've seen a couple of op-eds to this effect, he is on this drug, the steroid drug that is known to cause delusions of grandeur. And of course, so these are delusions of grandeur on top of delusions of grandeur. And he, when he entered Walter Reed Hospital, the nuclear football was right behind him. He has the sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. And that is something we should be very worried about. I would say the same of any individual, by the way, but in this case, I think we have a clear case of a really deranged person.
Thank you.
But let me just say one other thing about nuclear weapons. To some extent, I tried to make the point that both parties really have been remarkably consistent in sustaining U.S. nuclear weapons policy, and to an extent have normalized nuclear weapons. So that could also be a reason why people were slow to react or not, to Trump.
Craig, did you have a question?
I do, but I want to let the members kind of go first. So you've got some chat ones, and then I see Jose has one as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Jacqueline. I'd like to ask you a question, Jackie. Thank you for the very nice presentation you gave us. How close are we, given our current geopolitical and international security environment, to Secretary William Perry's nuclear nightmare if a terrorist is able to explode a crude nuclear bomb in Washington, D.C.?
I think that Perry is off the mark in his analysis. I think that the danger of use of nuclear weapons by a state is far more likely than any non-state actor. Nuclear weapons are very technologically challenging to create, also to obtain. Terrorists, I think, subnational terrorists have shown us time and time again they don't need very sophisticated weapons to achieve their aims. So I really don't think that, I think that is a misplaced concern, and we should be much more worried about an incident, let's say, between the United States and China involving a US military vessel entering the China Sea and encountering a Chinese vessel, or a US-Russian encounter in the Baltics, or an India-Pakistan exchange over Kashmir.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, Luis. Craig, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, well, I'll just go ahead and ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Jackie, I have my magic wand at the ready, and I'm now going to give you as much authority and influence as you could ever care to have. And everyone of consequence is listening to you in this scenario. What kinds of steps should we be working for and pushing for and advocating for to mitigate this horrible mess?
Well, I think, you know, there's no magic magic bullet, but I think that in the United States, I think that a reckoning with history is called for. I think that an apology, an official US apology for the war crimes it committed, and that's not unprecedented. There have been apologies for slavery, for Japanese internment, and so on. It's happened before. I think that a sober assessment of deterrence and unpacking of what deterrence means, and I think a genuine openness to engaging with the other nuclear weapon states and the rest of the world, you know, would be actually welcomed, although it will be a little bit harder now because Trump has burned so much goodwill towards the US. But, you know, I think that the concept of human security is a concept whose time has come, and this pandemic has made that as clear as anything possibly could. National security is, as defined by the protecting the state through any means necessary, it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. That's happening at the expense of its own people. So, I mean, this is really big picture stuff. I think we need to fundamentally redefine security.
Okay.
I think we need to address address systemic problems like racism and wealth inequality. We need to put people first. Joseph Rotblat was the only Manhattan Project scientist who resigned in protest when he found out what they were doing. And he said, the most important thing in a way that anybody has said, remember your humanity and forget the rest.
How about some of the conferences or treaties which are either in limbo, or you mentioned the review that was coming up next
Right.
April. What sorts of, again, ideally, what would we like our administration to be pushing for?
Well, first of all, the first thing would be to extend START for 5 years, which is the first one that's up, expires in February. That would give the US and Russia some time to negotiate.
And remind us what START is.
It's a strategic arms reduction treaty. That's the bilateral treaty that caps the number of deployed strategic nuclear weapons by both the US and Russia. And it's the last bilateral arms control treaty now that's still standing. Well, I would like the United States, and I'm sorry, I have to say this, it was under Obama, started it. The United States has been extremely hostile to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I mean, not only boycotting the negotiations, but actively hostile towards it. Now, why is that? The countries that negotiated the ban treaty are countries that already are banned from having nuclear weapons under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Most of them also are in nuclear weapon-free zones, which are in other international treaties that prohibit nuclear weapons. So they're essentially banning their own possession of nuclear weapons for a third time. Why should that be so threatening to the United States? Now, you know, many activists would like to see the United States join the ban treaty. I think that's pretty unlikely, but at least welcome it as a as a positive vision, embrace its goals, and then take some steps to start negotiations among the nuclear armed states. Now, in terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which comes up for its 5-year review by April, hopefully, you know, there's no enforcement mechanism in the treaty for the recognized nuclear armed states to comply with their obligations. There is the question of good faith. Good faith has a legal meaning, but there is no enforcement mechanism. That is why a number of countries went to the International Court of Justice in 1995 to ask the court to give an advisory opinion on the illegality of nuclear weapons. And that's when the court found there exists an obligation to negotiate it in good faith and conclude, you know, negotiations on the elimination of nuclear weapons. That's an authoritative interpretation by the highest court in the world. That's the Court of the United Nations, telling the nuclear armed states what they're supposed to do. They haven't done it. I've attended all of those meetings since all of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty review conferences and inter-year conferences since 1994. And it's just amazing to sit there and listen to the nuclear armed states year after year talk about all the progress they've made on disarmament. And what they mostly rely on is reductions in numbers. And it is true that the numbers have come way down, but the numbers are actually meaningless in terms of the destructive capacity of the weapons. In the meantime, there are new weapons being developed, you know, so we have qualitative arms racing going on while the numbers have gone down. And yet they claim year after year after year. And even though they're at each other's throats more and more, the 5 nuclear armed states, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK, usually manage to come together and make some kind of a joint statement. It's amazing. But that would be a place to actually lay out a serious proposal for something.
And some kind of enforcement mechanism.
Well, not an enforcement mechanism per se. I'm talking about, I don't see how there could be an enforcement mechanism. There is, by the way, an enforcement mechanism for the states that have forsworn nuclear weapons, and that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has inspection and monitoring requirements for countries that have nuclear power plants. But those don't apply to the countries with nuclear weapons.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. I do want to respect everyone's time because we're coming up on 1 o'clock. And I do want to recognize there are a few VIPs in the room with us today that I do want to recognize before we close up. We do have, I think, one more question we can get to, but I want to recognize first and foremost, Councilmember Pam Foley from the city of San Jose and a member of the club. She was here. She had to leave just now, but she wanted me to say hello to everyone, and she's happy to be here and misses us all terribly.
Ask her to ask the mayor to join Mayors for Peace.
I would venture to guess.
I've asked him.
I would venture to guess, given his proclivity for public accolades, that he'll probably be willing to join something like that as long as it gets him some publicity. We also have John Weed here with the Alameda Water District and a longtime member. John, thank you for being here. Our Democratic Party endorsed candidate for San Jose City Council in District 4, who can certainly ask the mayor to take part in this. David Cohen is here. Thank you for taking the time, David. We hope your campaign is going well. I might even give you a chance to shout yourself out in a second here. And Laura Casas from, I believe, Century Club member and also with the Foothill De Anza Community College District Board of Trustees. We have former council member Forrest Williams, our illustrious club treasurer here today. And I will, of course, shout out our host, Bill James, the chair of our County Democratic Party. So there's one more question in the chat I wanted to get to. And it's sort of related to what we've been talking about, but if Joe Biden were to be lucky enough to win this election, given what you've already said about how the Obama administration didn't necessarily take huge steps towards non-proliferation, what do you think is the first thing that we can urge as Democrats urge President Biden to do in terms of getting us back on track?
Well, I think it's something that he's inclined to do already, which is to return to diplomacy and start talking to the countries whose trust has been broken by the Trump administration. I think that a Biden administration, I'm sorry to say, because I knew this question was going to come up, the fundamentals are not going to be different because they've been the same since 1945. I do think for sure that Biden would return to diplomacy. He has been involved in all of the arms control negotiations. He has said he would extend the START treaty, and he might tinker around the edges of the nuclear weapons modernization, but without significant push from influential parties, I don't think he's likely to make any major changes.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jackie, and thank you so much for your time today. Craig, I think we should probably wrap up the Q&A for today, and then if anyone has any questions, you can always email us, and we're happy to pass along any questions to Jackie and hear back from her soon. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And Jackie, the remaining questions I have, I'll shoot you in an email.
Okay.
Okay.
And Craig, do you think we could have
it?
Craig, do you think we could have a second to let
Yeah,
David
we're going to
Cohen
have a
give a little
second
shout
for
out?
announcements.
Okay, great. I'd love to have David Cohen speak just briefly about his campaign, maybe for just a minute. I'll unmute you, David, if you're there and you want to say hello.
Thank you again, Jackie.
David, are you there? You want to give a shout?
Hi. Yeah, I have another place to go in a second. So I'll just say hello and thank you all for your support and encouragement during this time. It's Friday, but it feels like it's the 11th day of the week. So it's a crazy time, but we're hitting the home stretch. I think we're doing well. I think we're poised for good things in a few weeks. And with all your help and continued support for the next few weeks, we're going to make it to the finish line. And I'm excited about it. I think we've got we're in a great position. And again, thanks for all the messages and things as we go through the ups and downs of the final few weeks of the campaign. But it looks like we're ready to carry this across the finish line. I think we're gonna have victory in November 3rd in District 4.
All right.
Awesome. We'll flip the script on that council. And oh, by the way, Jackie, do you want to? I can throw it in the chat. Is there a website where we can find out more information about Western States Legal Foundation?
Yeah.
And your work?
Yeah, it's www.wslfweb.org. Yep.
And
All right.
and we should make that available to members, Peter, on our website.
Yeah, if you go to the event page for this event, actually, I believe I have the link up there, so you can follow that. And there's also a link to a great article that I threw in the chat earlier that Jackie suggested.
And Craig,
Yes.
I want to send you the U.S. Conference of Mayors resolution that I referred to, plus another one, because the question about what should we as Democrats be asking for, I think they lay it out. It's nonpartisan, but I think they lay it out very well in those two resolutions.
Excellent. So before we wrap up, does anybody else have an announcement they want to make? All right. Thank you, Peter, for I was remiss in acknowledging our electeds and our party chair. So thank you for getting that. Hey, next month, everybody, hopefully we're going to be celebrating. And we've got Terry Christensen to give us a wrap up of all the wonderful things election related. So be sure and watch your email and register for that meeting.
And have no fear, it is Friday the 13th, that meeting, but I'm assuming we'll have at least some sort of results to celebrate, I hope.
It's 2020. What could happen? What could go wrong?
What could possibly go
But
wrong?
his emails.
Well, I think Friday the 13th is a good luck day for us.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you
Thank you,
next time.
Jackie. Appreciate it.
Thanks
Thank you,
again.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.